So for the subjective data, the patient is a 58-year-old female, married right-handed, known hypertensive with hypothyroidism, baseline independent. Her chief complaint is that she came in due to the vision loss of 9 months duration. So for the history of present illness, 9 months prior to consultation, the patient noticed that she was occasionally bumping on her side. No consult or medication were taken. In the interim, the patient was apparently well. 3 months prior to consultation, she is feeling like her side vision is being cut off, as if she's looking through a tube. So she frequently bumps her shoulders on or hips on door frames, furniture, or people when navigating crowded spaces, and she has also had near misses when driving. This is particularly seen during changing lanes or merging because she reports that she doesn't see vehicles in her side mirrors. So she denies any blurriness, distortion, blind spots directly in front of her. She also denies any eye pain, redness, or discharge. 1 month prior to consultation, the patient is now experiencing dull headaches behind her eyes, relieved with pain medications. There is also a persistence of symptoms, hence the consult. So for the pertinent positives, there is loss of side vision, headache, and she also mentioned milky nipple discharge. While the pertinent negative include blurriness, distortion, eye pain, redness, eye discharge, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, history of seizure, stroke, trauma, and accident. So for the past medical history, the patient is diagnosed with hypothyroidism, but this is controlled with levothyroxine. She takes 75 micrograms of it once daily, and she also has a mild hypertension, which is controlled by hydrochlorothiazide, which she takes 25 milligram of it once daily. There is no history of head trauma, stroke, or other neurological conditions. For social history, the patient is married and currently lives with her husband. She is a non-smoker and rarely consumes alcohol. She works as a full-time librarian, which involves a lot of reading and scanning shelves. So for the family history, there is no significant family history of neurological or endocrine disorders. For the review of systems, there is no, the patient denies any double vision flashes or floaters. She also denies focal weakness, numbness, or speech difficulties, and no history of seizures. For endocrine, she denies any heat or cold intolerance, aside from her well-controlled hypothyroidism. She also has no excessive thirst or urination, but she mentioned that there is um, milky nipple discharge. For the reproductive, she reports irregular menstrual cycles and hot flashes, but this is consistent with her age, which is perimenopause.
Now for the objective data. On physical examination, vital signs are within normal limits. Blood pressure is 120 over 70 millimeters of mercury. Heart rate is 86 beats per minute. Respiratory rate is 16 cycles per minute. Temperature was not elicited, and oxygen saturation is 98% on room air. For HEANT, anicteric sclerae and pink conjunctivae. For the chest and lungs, it was noted that it had clear breath sounds. The breast, notable milky discharge on bilateral breast. For the cardiovascular, no carotid bruits, normal rate and regular rhythm. For the abdomen, it is flabby, soft, and non-tender. For the extremities, no bipedal edema was noted.
For the neurologic exam, mental status, the patient is awake, alert oriented, and with intact higher cortical functions. Next. For the cranial nerve examination, cranial nerves 2 and 3, visual acuity 20/20 in both eyes, pupils 2 millimeters, and reactive to light, fundoscopy normal, positive for red-orange reflex, and with no hemorrhages or papilledema, but visual field testing revealed bilateral hemianopsia. Cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6. So primary gaze midline with full extraocular movements, direct and consensual pupillary reflexes intact, and the rest of the cranial nerves 1, 5, 7 to 12 are intact. Next. And for the motor, normal bulk, tone, and strength in all extremities, and Babinski reflex is absent. For sensory, no sensory deficits. Proprioception is intact. For cerebellar, no nystagmus. Coordination is intact, and gait is normal. And for the meninges, neck is supple. And as for the initial assessment and plan of this case, the patient presents with a classic insidious onset of bitemporal hemianopsia confirmed on confrontational visual field testing. This specific pattern of visual field loss is highly suggestive of a lesion compressing the optic chiasm. The associated symptoms of headaches and milky nipple discharge, galactorrhea, combined with irregular periods, strongly point towards pituitary adenoma, specifically a prolactinoma, as the underlying cause.
So given the subjective and objective data, we came up with bitemporal hemianopsia secondary to optic chiasm compression due to pituitary mass. So why is that? So let's subdivide the primary impression into three parts. Next slide, please.
Okay, let me just interrupt you. No? So, based on your objective data, the localization, as mentioned, is in the optic chiasm. Correct? I hope everyone got it, no? So, I missed the slide. So, usually during our process, as you notice, no, um, after reporting the history and the physical examination, before you state your primary working impression, we localize the problem if there is any neurological lesion. Because it's possible in certain cases that there's no neurological lesion, then still we need to mention that. So this shows no based on the history, very clear yung description ng vision loss. Kasi if you're going to notice, vision loss yung chief complaint. Tama? Vision loss, no?
Yes po, Doc.
Pero kasi pag isipin mo vision loss, usually it pertains to central vision or visual acuity, di ba?
Apo.
Pero based on the history of present illness, that's why it's very important no to expound ko anong klase. In very subjective complaints, no? Like dizziness, di ba? Like dizziness. Dizziness, very vague din yung each patient has their own description of being dizzy. That's why it's very important. Tapos it was confirmed by your neurological examination na peripheral vision pala yung affected. And then, collating all the physical examination findings, dun yung localization natin, optic chiasm. And then, dun yung different differentials. Okay. So, any questions or clarifications before we move to the other parts of the discussion? If none, then you can proceed.
Okay po, Doc. So we'll continue with the neurological localization po muna.
So for neurological localization, as mentioned by Doc, based on the neuroanatomical presentation of the patient, such as the bitemporal hemianopsia or the progressive peripheral visual field loss, the preserved central vision of 20/20 bilaterally, the normal pupillary reflexes, headaches, and galactorrhea, the patient demonstrates classic chiasmatic compression syndrome. The bitemporal hemianopsia with the preserved central 20/20 vision localizes the lesion precisely to the optic chiasm. So anatomically, it is located approximately 10 millimeters superior to the pituitary gland within the suprasellar cistern, meaning it is the superior border of the pituitary gland. In addition, the pituitary sits within the sella turcica and its lateral borders are the cavernous sinus and internal carotid arteries. Next slide. Yeah, so here's a picture from Netter. So as we can see, the optic chiasm is above the pituitary as its superior border. And note that the distance between them is only 10 millimeters. So the retinal fibers from both eyes carry the temporal visual field that decussates at the optic chiasm, which explains the occurrence of bitemporal hemianopsia upon the compression of optic chiasm that may be due to a mass.
As for the clinical implications of the, sorry, can you go back to the previous slide? Thank you. As for the clinical implications of the pituitary tumor, the suprasellar or superior pituitary mass extension causes selective compression of the decussating nasal fibers in the optic chiasm, which was mentioned by Pierce, and this results in bitemporal hemianopsia, which is illustrated in the figure in the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. As seen in letter C, or in the middle, the compression of the inferior part of the optic chiasm will cause the disruption of the decussating nasal fibers, which transmits what we see from the temporal sides of our field of view. This in turn would lead to the loss of the temporal visual field, or what Doc Castillo has mentioned earlier, yung peripheral vision natin. The patient also presents with dull headaches behind her eyes, which is the second most common neurologic symptom of pituitary tumors. Now, this symptom suggests intracellular growth as well, together with the suprasellar extension that I've mentioned earlier. As this growth within the sella turcica would put pressure on the dural plate, hence would cause headaches behind the eyes. However, it is important to note that the size of the mass still poorly correlates with headache severity. So even if malaki na yung tumor, pwede pa rin siyang yung headache niya pwede pa rin ma-relieve ng medication. Next slide, please. Lastly, for preserved functions, it is important to note that the patient has a central vision of 20/20 OU, absence of diplopia, intact pupillary reflexes, and apologies for not mentioning it in the PowerPoint, but the patient can also identify colors, and I will explain why later, why it's important. So the preserved functions of these mentioned features of the eye demonstrate that the compression spares the macular fibers, the uncrossed temporal retinal fibers, the oculomotor nerves, and pupillomotor pathways. These, however, could be eventually affected if the tumor remains unmanaged. So once the tumor grows more and compresses the supero-posterior portion of the optic chiasm, where the macular fibers are located, visual acuity will eventually decrease. The compression of these fibers, macular fibers, would also cause loss of red perception, which is another feature of cellular masses according to Harrison's. However, the patient is able to identify colors, which further suggests that the macular fibers are still undisturbed, as these fibers are also responsible for transmitting color vision. Lastly, the tumor may also grow laterally, which could eventually disrupt the path of the oculomotor nerve, causing diplopia and pupillary reflex dysfunction as well.
So combining all the information from the subjective, objective data and the neurological localization, which was explained earlier by the other members of the group, we have come up with the primary impression by temporal hemianopsia secondary to optic chiasm compression due to a pituitary mass. So next slide, please. So we have divided the primary impression into three parts to explain why we have think of that primary impression. So first is the patient after the physical examination, the patient was confirmed to have bitemporal hemianopsia, which might be caused by the compression of the optic chiasm, which then explains the loss of the side or the peripheral vision um, um, experienced by the patient. Hence explains the when the patient bumps to her shoulders or her hips under frames, furniture or people navigating in crowded spaces.
Now for the optic chiasm compression, our patient came in with progressive loss of side vision and dull headaches just behind the eyes. Now the optic chiasm, which sits right above the pituitary gland, is where the nasal retinal fibers from both eyes cross. These fibers carry the outer parts of our visual field, and when something presses on the chiasm from below, like a growing pituitary tumor, those crossing fibers are squeezed and causing bitemporal hemianopsia. That means the patient loses peripheral vision on both sides, but central vision stays sharp in the early stages. So what's pressing on the chiasm? In this case, the likely culprit is a pituitary mass, and this isn't just an eye problem because pituitary tumors often cause hormonal changes too. Now, the patient also presents with irregular menstrual cycle and milky nipple discharge on both breasts. Considering the age of the patient, she's already 58 years old, these symptoms may indicate perimenopausal changes, but the accompanying visual field defects and headache point strongly toward a functional pituitary tumor that secretes prolactin and may indicate galactorrhea. With this and the patient's history of 9 month progression of the mass may be benign, specifically pointing to pituitary adenoma. More specific is prolactinoma. Other details and the final diagnosis will be further elaborated later in the discussion.
So for our differential diagnosis, we also considered problems that are not neuro localized but can still present with the patient's complaints. So one of which is glaucoma, specifically your primary open angle glaucoma. So as we know from ophthalmology, glaucoma is about an increase in the intraocular pressure. But for primary open angle, this is secondary to degenerative processes in the meshwork or the canal of Schlemm that prevents the appropriate drainage of your aqueous humor into the canal, which leads to an increase in intraocular pressure. And most of the patients who have glaucoma could also present with peripheral vision loss. That's why one of their complaints is also tunnel vision or seeing through a tube. So, however, for this patient's case, there are no fundoscopic abnormalities seen in the physical exam. And according to the literatures, this could be the case because she may have an early course of glaucoma. Other risk factors that we have ruled in to include glaucoma as a differential includes the age, because according to literatures, glaucoma incidence increases as the patient ages from 50. The gender as well, because they have mentioned that women have a slightly higher tendency than men to have it, which the patient is. And the presence of comorbidities like DM, hypertension, and heart disease. So for our patient, she has mild hypertension. However, despite these rule-in symptoms, we still have no explanation for the retroorbital headaches or the milky nipple discharge, as this is not part of glaucoma's pathophysiology. So, the headache of glaucoma tends to be characterized as being felt around the eyes and radiating towards the forehead, but is not described as retroorbital. And of course, the presence of galactorrhea is not the usual part of the symptoms of glaucoma. So with this, we have ruled out glaucoma as the primary impression.
So another differential we could consider for this case is optic glioma, also known as optic pathway glioma, a rare slow-growing tumor of the optic nerve, optic chiasm, or optic tract. But for this patient, specifically, it is the optic chiasm. So the tumor in the optic chiasm would cause nerve thickening and compression, resulting to visual loss. So how do we rule this diagnosis in? So first is the presence of visual loss. So bitemporal hemianopsia could be present if it involves the optic chiasm. And then the presence of headache could also occur with the tumor extension or compression. And then how do we rule it out? So first one is it is often linked with those with neurofibromatosis type 1. So there were no Coffey-Oley spots, Lisch nodules present in our pertinent info. And then next is the age mismatch. This is more commonly diagnosed in children, usually below 10 years old. And this is very rare with adults, specifically for our patient, which is already 58 years old. And then next one is even though vision loss is present, vision loss in optic glioma often presents as unilateral and asymmetric. But for our patient, it is asymmetric. Next is there is no presence of proptosis, optic dyswelling, nystagmus, strabismus, nausea, dizziness, convulsions, developmental regression, or growth retardation. And then endocrine features could also be present in optic glioma, but it is also very rare, and it will point more to another diagnosis. So we could also rule this one out.
So one of the differential diagnoses that we also considered is meningioma because although they are usually benign, they can cause symptoms by compressing adjacent brain structures, especially when located near the optic chiasm. So in our patient, there are a couple of positive risk factors that support the possibility of meningioma. First is the patient's age, which is 58 years old, and which places her in the common age range for meningiomas, typically middle age to older adults from 30 to 70 years old. Then sex, meningiomas are more common in females. Studies say that this is likely due to hormonal influences, especially progesterone sensitivity. However, there are also risk factors that are absent in this case. First is there's no known genetic predisposition such as neurofibromatosis type 2, which is associated with multiple meningiomas, and there's also no history of cranial radiation, which is another risk factor. For the clinical findings, the patient presents with a slow progression of visual field loss over several months, associated headaches, and notable visual disturbances, specifically bitemporal hemianopsia. However, certain findings are less supportive of meningioma since the patient denies nausea, vomiting, or seizures, which can be seen in more aggressive or larger intracranial masses. Also, she presents with galactorrhea, menstrual irregularities, and signs of hormonal dysfunction, which are not typical of meningiomas.
Okay, so for our other differential diagnosis, we have craniopharyngioma, which is a benign tumor from the Rathke pouch remnants that grows near the pituitary, causing problems by pressing on nearby brain areas that control hormones, vision, and cerebrospinal fluid flow. So our patient here is a 58-year-old woman, which falls within the adult range in which craniopharyngioma can occur. According to Harrison's and also Adams, it says that craniopharyngioma has a bimodal age presentation or distribution. It can be seen in children, actually most commonly seen in children now, but it can also be seen in adults, specifically ages between 55 to 65 years old. So our patient here presents a bilateral hemianopsia, headaches, and menstrual irregularities, features that can be seen in craniopharyngioma. However, she does not show features often associated with the condition, such as cognitive changes, temperature regulation problems, and symptoms of increased thirst or increased urination, indicating involvement of nearby structures like the hypothalamus. So overall, while some aspects of her presentations are compatible with craniopharyngioma, there is absence of certain other features typically associated with craniopharyngioma, especially the ones involving the hypothalamus.
Another differential we can consider is a pituitary adenoma. So it is a benign tumor of the anterior pituitary gland that may encroach on structures surrounding the sella turcica, which can cause visual symptoms and endocrine disorders. So for the risk factor, we can consider that she is female, which is it's slightly more common in females than in males. And it is also the most common cause of pituitary hormone hypersecretion manifestations. As you can see in this patient who shows symptoms of hyperprolactinemia, such as oligomenorrhea and galactorrhea. We can also consider that she presents with headaches, which is the second most common symptom of pituitary tumors, as mentioned earlier. And that she also presents with hypothyroidism, which is also linked to pituitary tumors, as well as bitemporal hemianopsia due to the encroaching on the structures surrounding the sella turcica. To rule out, we can also consider that she does not have any intake of drugs or medications that may cause hyperprolactinemia, such as dopamine receptor agonists and methyl dopa. For clinical findings, it can also be ruled out that she does not present with infertility, or the history does not have any information on infertility. She has no history of renal disease or chronic kidney disease, and there is no loss of function mutation in the prolactin receptor gene. Next, please. And then for another differential diagnosis is the non-functioning pituitary adenoma. So this is inputted because it's also the second most common classification of pituitary adenomas and may also present with signs of hyperprolactinemia. So there's also since our patient presents with a menstrual cycle disorder showing with oligomenorrhea, she also presents with headaches and visual field defects and hypothyroidism. This can be ruled in. But to rule out a non-functioning pituitary adenoma, we can consider that she does not present with diminished visual acuity, since she presents with 20/20 for both eyes, and then there is absence of diplopia. She does not present with fatigue or lethargy due to hypogonadism. And although this is a rare manifestation, she does not present also with cerebrospinal fluid rhinorrhea.
So for the diagnostic test or workup, so we started to the detailed history. So first is to clarify the onset, progression, and the pattern of visual loss. So either is it tunnel vision or side vision loss, because the gradual symmetric side vision loss or the bitemporal hemianopsia suggests that optic chiasm compression is from the midline mass, like the pituitary adenoma. And the next is to ask about the headaches, galactorrhea, menstrual irregularities, and sexual dysfunction, because for the headache, this is often due to the stretching of the dura or increased intracranial pressure. And then for the galactorrhea, menstrual irregularities, and sexual dysfunction, it suggests hyperprolactinemia, because prolactin's main physiologic role is to stimulate the milk production after the childbirth. But when prolactin levels are abnormally high outside the pregnancy or lactation, it disrupts the normal hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And then next, we need to review the signs of hypopituitarism and mass effects. So we need to ask about the signs and symptoms of other pituitary hormone excess or deficiency of the patient. So example of this is if the patient is having fatigue, cold intolerance, or weight changes, that might suggest a hypothyroidism. And if the patient has has polyuria or polydipsia, it might suggest diabetes insipidus that might suggest a posterior pituitary involvement. And then also for if there's any skin changes that may suggest a Cushing's disease, which results in excessive ACTH. And then lastly is to check for family history of the uh, endocrine tumor. And then next, we do the physical and neurological exam. So for this, we need to do this to localize the lesion and assess the functional impact on cranial nerves and visual pathways. So first is to do the complete neurologic exam, emphasizing the cranial nerve 2 to 6. So for cranial nerve 2, we need to do this to check for the direct tumor compression, which suggests an optic chiasm involvement that could lead to temporal visual fields, which is a classic pituitary mass effect. And then for the cranial nerve 3 to 6, we need to check this for lateral extension of the tumor into the cavernous sinus, since it can impair the ocular motility that might cause diplopia or ptosis. And then for the confrontational visual field testing, so this confirms the bitemporal hemianopsia, which supports again the optic chiasm lesion. And then next for the fundoscopic exam for optic nerve changes. So we need to do this to check if there's papilledema, which is a sign of increased intracranial pressure, which can complicate the management. So we could also do the HCG test. So even though the patient is already 58 years old, so the pregnancy itself elevates the prolactin and enlarges the pituitary. So this must be ruled out before diagnosing a prolactinoma or interpreting high prolactin levels. And this also guides the safety in imaging and therapy choices. And then lastly, for the breast exam, this is done for to check if there's galactorrhea, which supports the hyperprolactinemia as a key clue towards the prolactinoma or the stroke compression syndrome.
Another diagnostic test that we could do is we could evaluate the hormones of the patient since the patient is presenting with symptoms that may be due to hormonal imbalance. This helps us differentiate whether the imbalance is originating from the gland or due to a pituitary problem. So first, we could test for the serum prolactin since the patient has a galactorrhea. So this raises a suspicion for hyperprolactinemia due to a possible pituitary tumor. Next, we could test for the insulin growth factor 1 or growth hormone, since increased levels of these hormones are commonly associated with pituitary tumors as well. Screening for the excess growth hormone production in suspected somatotroph adenomas are important as well. Another one is for plasma adenocorticotropic hormone. So this is to detect any adenocorticotropic hormone dependent cortisol excess, which may suggest a Cushing disease from a pituitary source. By combining cortisol and ACTH results, we can distinguish whether the problem is in the pituitary or the adrenal glands itself. Next slide. We could also test for the patient's luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, estradiol, and alpha subunit. This could help us evaluate the gonadotropin production, which may indicate a functioning gonadotroph adenoma. And we also test for the alpha subunit since this is a common component of several pituitary hormones, including TSH, LH, and FSH, and its elevation can be a useful marker for identifying pituitary tumors. Next, we also test for the TSH and free T4 and T3. This is to detect any secondary hyper or hypothyroidism from pituitary insufficiency. It is important to note that these hormones can also be elevated and deficient due to other factors such as pregnancy or kidney failure. Therefore, careful interpretation is needed when evaluating such in the context of pituitary tumors. Next, to directly visualize the tumor, we can proceed with neuroimaging. So we could do an MRI without contrast, as it is a gold standard for initial evaluation of intracranial tumors. So it provides a detailed pituitary size, the tumor extent, and its relationship to nearby structures. Next, we can do an MRI with gadolinium, which may confirm the cellular mass and which helps assess its size. So a size of more than 1 centimeters could be a macroadenoma, while less than 1 is a microadenoma. So this also helps evaluate optic chiasm compression, cavernosinus involvement, and it helps rule out apoplexy or aneurysm. So if MRI is unavailable, we can do a CT scan, but it is less sensitive, but it can still detect masses or any calcifications present.
And then lastly, we do the visual acuity and visual field testing. Although the MRI can confirm the presence and location of the pituitary compressing the optic chiasm, so visual acuity and visual field tests, specifically the brachyperimetry. So these are necessary to objectively assess the degree and pattern of the vision loss. So in cases of the pituitary adenoma, so a bitemporal hemianopsia strongly suggests a optic chiasm involvement. So these tests provide a functional baseline for monitoring the progression or improvement after treatment, and these are essential for determining the urgency of intervention, specifically if rapid deterioration is detected.
So based on the history and physical examination of the patient, we have arrived at the final diagnosis of bilateral hemianopsia, hypothyroidism, and galactorrhea secondary to pituitary adenoma. Next slide. So first, let me give an overview of pituitary adenoma. So these are tumors originating from the anterior pituitary gland. They are typically slow-growing and benign in nature, and they may develop sporadically or more uncommonly from familiar causes. So most of these tumors are sharply demarcated and non-invasive. However, a small subset can behave more aggressively, invading nearby structures. So due to their relocations, pituitary adenomas can cause various compressive symptoms, including visual field defects, cranial nerve palsies, and headaches, especially if they are large enough. Additionally, they may also cause endocrine dysfunction if they are hormone secreting, depending on the type of hormone they secrete. Classification of pituitary adenomas can be made based on size, which include micro, macro, and sometimes giant pituitary adenoma. Microadenomas are defined as tumors with the largest diameter of less than 10 millimeters. These tumors are usually confined within the sella turcica. On the other hand, macroadenomas measure more than 10 millimeters in diameter and may remain either intracellular or extend into the supracellular region. Lastly, giant pituitary adenomas pertain to those that exceed 40 millimeters in its largest diameters. Now, these larger tumors can compress adjacent structure, causing compressive symptoms. Now, aside from size, pituitary adenomas can also be classified as either functional or non-functional. Functional adenomas produce excess hormones and subsequently present with endocrine-related symptoms. So in order of decreasing prevalence, functional adenomas include lactotrope adenomas or prolactinomas, which secrete prolactin, and the most common functioning pituitary adenoma. The second type is the somatotrope adenomas, which secrete growth hormones and are associated with either acromegaly or gigantism. Corticotrope adenomas secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone and causes Cushing disease. The fourth type is the thyrotrope adenomas, which produce TSH, which can result to hyperthyroidism. And lastly, some tumors produce multiple hormones and are classified as plurihormonal adenomas. Non-functioning adenomas, on the other hand, do not secrete hormones, but they can still cause symptoms such as headache or vision loss due to mass effects. Uh, So as mentioned earlier, the majority of pituitary adenomas occur sporadically without a clear inherited cause. However, around 5% are familial or linked to genetic mutations affecting tumor suppressor genes or cell cycle regulators. This mutation can lead to loss of normal cell growth control and unchecked proliferation of pituitary cells. Genetic mechanisms in familial cases include loss of tumor suppressor function, such as in the case of multiple endocrine neoplasia type 1, disruption of cell cycle regulation, in the example of CDKN1B mutation in men type 4, and lastly, abnormal growth signaling in AIP mutations in familial isolated pituitary adenoma. Next. Now I'd like to give an overview of the mechanism behind the endocrine-related symptoms experienced by the patient. So normally, dopamine is released from the hypothalamus, which suppresses prolactin secretion via the tuberoinfundibular pathway. In prolactinomas, there is autonomous secretion of prolactin by tumor cells, bypassing hypothalamic inhibition. This can lead to elevated prolactin levels in the blood, leading to hormonal effects such as first, there is increased lactogenesis or milk production from the increased prolactin. Aside from that, elevated prolactin can also inhibit GnRH hormone secretion, which leads to decreased luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone levels, resulting in hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. This hormonal imbalance can cause symptoms related to reproductive dysfunction. So next, the mechanism behind the patient's hypothyroidism is not as clear-cut, but the leading explanation could be from increased intracellular pressure. Pituitary adenomas can reach the pressure inside the cella turcica, which compresses the portal blood vessels that deliver the hypothalamic hormones like TRH to the anterior pituitary. Because of this, the anterior pituitary receives less TRH, impairing its function, ultimately leading to hypothyroidism.
For the risk factors of pituitary adenoma, it includes the patient's sex and age. A study on the incidence, demographics, and survival of patients with primary pituitary tumors in the United States have reported that females have a bimodal age-related distribution in contrast to the unimodal age-related distribution in males. In the Philippines, according to a scoping review on pituitary adenomas by Tabuzo et al., there are no available epidemiologic study of pituitary adenoma that encompasses the whole country, and only hospital-based reports are available. In the 2003 study by the Philippine General Hospital, they reported that majority of their patients with pituitary adenoma are females. Other risk factors are in the context of genetic predisposition, as mentioned by Albert, are those people with MEN1 and MEN4 syndromes, Carney complex, McCone, and Albert syndrome have an increased risk of developing pituitary adenoma, and those patients with familial isolated pituitary adenoma, which is the only pituitary tumor that is related to history. So moving forward, we'll now discuss the clinical features of pituitary adenomas. Generally, we can divide this into two: those that are related to hormonal abnormalities and those that are associated with mass effect, although some manifestations are present in relation to either one of them. Clinical manifestations due to hormonal abnormalities varies depending on the type of adenoma the patient has. As previously mentioned, pituitary adenomas can be classified depending on its function and the specific hormone that it releases. So for patients with lactotrope adenoma or prolactinoma, they are associated with benign neoplastic proliferation of lactotropes that leads to the elevation of prolactin secretion. This leads to the inhibition of gonadotropin-releasing hormone, disruption of hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, then the decrease of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which therefore the presentation of these patients are related to hypogonadism. In males, they present with infertility, impotence, erectile dysfunction, and decreased libido. For women, They present with amenorrhea, oligomenorrhea, with anovulation or infertility. Both men and women with prolactinoma can also present with a decrease in bone density and galactorrhea, although incidence of galactorrhea is less common in male. Mild hyperprolactinemia may also manifest in patients with non-prolactin secreting pituitary adenoma due to pituitary stalk effect or mass effect. Somatotrope adenoma is associated with excessive secretion of growth hormone that could lead to excessive generation of insulin-like growth factor. In adults, this leads to acromegaly characterized by local bone growth because the linear bone growth is not possible due to the fusion of epiphysis of long bones. In children and adolescents, they develop gigantism as a result of chronic growth hormone excess, which leads to an abnormally tall stature and other related symptoms. So corticotrope adenomas, these are adenomas that releases adenocorticotropic hormones, which causes hypersecretion of cortisol that presents as Cushing syndrome. It has a broad clinical presentation that varies significantly between patients. Typically, they present with weight gain, with central obesity, fat deposition in the posterior region of the neck or buffalo hump formation, facial skin thickening, purple striae in the lateral abdominal region, and easy body bruising. Associated comorbidities to Cushing syndromes are glucose intolerance, reproductive dysfunction, osteoporosis, hypertension, and spontaneous ecchymosis. The other clinical manifestations of pituitary adenomas may be due to mass effect. They are typically present with pituitary adenomas that are greater than 10 millimeters in size, or what we call the macroadenomas. Tumor growth would eventually compress the pituitary gland and would later on affect the optic chiasm as it extends upwards and out of the cella. This could result in visual impairment that would present as bitemporal hemianopsia, blurred vision, and decreased visual acuity. The mass could also extend into the cavernous sinus, which would lead to the development of ocular motor palsies and possible compression of the internal carotid artery. Extension of the mass into the temporal lobe could cause indentation that would result in seizure. CSF rhinorrhea, although rare, is a result of erosion of the cella. Hypothalamic compression could lead to diabetes insipidus, hypothermia, and somnolence. Pituitary apoplexy is a medical emergency associated with pituitary adenoma due to the spontaneous hemorrhage of adenoma that has outgrown its blood supply. This is characterized by sudden onset of severe headache that is described as retroorbital, frontal, bitemporal, or generalized, or patients with generalized ophthalmoplegia. Patients also presents with bilateral visual loss and in severe cases, drowsiness or coma. So now we'll continue with the discussion by elaborating a bit more on the bitemporal hemianopsia problem of our patient and discussing more about its etiology and pathogenesis. As previously mentioned, bitemporal hemianopsia is consistent with larger tumors as a result of compression that would later on damage the optic chiasm where the nasal retinal fibers cross. It is characterized by the loss of outer visual fields in both eyes. Our patient presented with progressive vision loss, particularly in the peripheral fields, which aligns with the typical presentation of this condition. Headache is another common symptom that further supports the diagnosis, as it may indicate an underlying compressive lesion. This condition commonly results from a tumor or lesion impinging on the optic chiasm, the decussation point of the optic nerve conveying visual information from the nasal retina in each eye. Since the final diagnosis is pituitary adenoma, the tumor is the main compressive lesion that may possibly impinge the optic chiasm, which leads to the vision loss peripherally. And since it is pituitary in origin, other manifestations such as galactorrhea, prolactinoma, and amenorrhea are seen.
So for the anatomical function of the bitemporal hemianopsia, the structure shows how the optic pathway is organized. We have already seen the position of the optic chiasm in the mid-sagittal section of the brain as presented earlier by the other members of the group. In this view, you can now appreciate the position of the optic chiasm or the other important anatomical structures relevant to the case on the coronal plane. Next slide, please. So the cranial nerve 2 or the optic nerve is responsible for conveying visual information from the retina of each eye to the primary visual cortex. Visual information processing is organized such that the right half of the visual field of both eyes is processed by the left half of the retina, while the left half of the visual field is processed by the right half of the retina. Retinal ganglion cells project myelinated axons that carry sensory afferent fibers through the optic chiasm. A key event occurs at the optic chiasm, which the optic nerve fibers originating from the nasal half of each retina decussate, or meaning they cross over to the contralateral side of the brain for processing. This decussation is vital for organizing visual input, where all optic nerve fibers relaying information from the left visual field of both eyes are directed to the right hemisphere of the brain, and conversely, all fibers carrying the right visual field information are directed to the left hemisphere. The optic chiasm is anatomically positioned along the midline of the ventral subarachnoid space of the brain, located inferior to the hypothalamus and anterior communicating artery, and superior to the pituitary gland. Now, after passing to the optic chiasm, the optic nerve becomes the optic tract, which then synapses to the lateral geniculate nucleus of the thalamus and subsequently projects optic radiations to the primary visual cortex or V1 located in the occipital lobe. Next slide, please. So here, we can see the location of the pituitary adenoma. The optic chiasm lies just above the pituitary gland within the sella turcica, making it particularly susceptible to compressions from upward growing lesions such as the pituitary adenoma, because the bony walls of the sella turcica restricts expansion in other directions. These tumors often extend superiorly and impinge directly chiasm. Fibers from the nasal halves of both retina cross the opposite side, while temporal retinal fibers remain uncrossed and lateral. So the crossing nasal fibers are positioned centrally, so they are the first to be affected by midline compression. The nasal retinal processes visual input from the temporal or outer visual fields of each eye, and therefore, damage to these fibers disrupt transmission of peripheral vision from both eyes. As a result, patient develops bitemporal hemianopsia while central vision and nasal fields remain intact. This selective peripheral field loss can significantly impair spatial awareness, making everyday activities such as driving or navigation through crowds more hazardous. Now presenting the common clinical manifestations of bitemporal hemianopsia. Bitemporal hemianopsia manifests primarily as a loss of peripheral vision on both sides, leading to a distinctive tunnel-like vision, where the patient can only perceive the central part of the visual field. This specific visual field defects is characterized by absent perception in the temporal halves of both eyes. When tested for example, confrontation visual testing, individuals experiencing bitemporal hemianopsia may find it difficult to notice objects to the side unless they actively turn their head to look. So this can lead to various practical difficulties in daily life, and patient might bump into objects or door frames, particularly on both sides, indicating their impaired peripheral awareness. Driving becomes challenging due to an inability to detect vehicle or pedestrians in the periphery, posing a significant safety risk. Furthermore, navigating crowded environments becomes problematic as side vision is essential for spatial awareness in such situations. It is important to note that initially, a patient's pupil and visual acuity may remain normal unless there is also concurrent involvement of the optic nerve itself. This condition arises from damage to the optic chiasm, specifically affecting the crossing fibers from the nasal halves of both retina. which are responsible for processing the temporal visual fields of each eye.
Hello. Okay. So next we have the treatment. First we have the dopamine 2 agonist. So these are the first in line pharmacotherapy for this case. So we use cabergoline and bromocriptine, which are commonly used to suppress the synthesis and release of prolactin and lactotroph cellular proliferation. So these are good for shrinkage, restoration of visual fields if there is any defect, and reversal for galactorrhea, which is suitable for a patient since she is experiencing milky nipple discharge and bitemporal hemianopsia. Then we have stereotactic radiosurgery, which uses CT guidance to deliver high doses of radiotherapy to the tumor. So these are for patients with brain metastases and primary tumors such as pituitary tumor, and those who have resistance to conventional whole brain radiation therapy. This can be considered if the patient experiences persistent or recurrent pituitary adenoma after surgery. For the surgical treatment, we have transsphenoidal surgery, which is a minimally invasive surgical procedure used to remove tumors from the pituitary gland via transnasal approach or endoscopic endonasal approach. So it's indicated for adenomas that are symptomatic, that have caused visual abnormalities and or demonstrate progressive enlargement on sequential MRIs. So according to Schwartz, it's considered, we consider surgery if the patient experiences recurrence of symptoms, persistence of mass effect, or endocrinologic dysfunction despite the adequate dopamine agonist therapy. Then we have the supportive management.
So for the supportive management, so first is yung ophthalmology follow-up. So given the patients presenting complaint related to visual disturbances, no, continued ophthalmology follow-up is essential to monitor yung visual function and detect if there's any progressions or complications dun sa visual ni patient. And as we all know that early identification of visual changes is critical for timely intervention. And second is endocrinology follow-up. So as the final diagnosis is pituitary adenoma, so yung regular endocrine evaluation is warranted to assess yung potential hormonal imbalances such as deficiency or hypersecretion of pituitary hormones. And third is lifestyle and general health maintenance. So considering then yung age ni patient, occupation, and yung underlying endocrine condition which na-discuss nung iba kong groupmates earlier, it is crucial to have a lifestyle modification. So the patient needs to have adequate nutrition, and also since the patient works as a full-time librarian, no, it's important to have a workload management to reduce stress and fatigue. And fourth is yung patient education. It's important to tell the patient to adhere to scheduled follow-up appointments and to comply to the prescribed medications. And then lastly is psychosocial support. So encourage emotional support from the husband and family, and also recommend some stress-reducing activities for the patient, such as relaxation techniques, mindfulness techniques, and also could have a support group regarding dun sa condition ni patient. And that's all for the supportive management in this case.
So
after the management, go to the prognosis. So according to studies, there's a generally good outcome as long as there is a good adherence to treatment, and there's a here we can achieve long-term normalization of the prolactin. So improvement of the symptoms and visual defects can be seen in 6 to 12 months, and after 2 years, discontinuation of the treatment can be already done, given that the prolactin concentrations are normalized and are able to be maintained, and that the adenoma is no longer visualized by MRI. So I think that would be everything for the prognosis. Thank you for listening. That's for case report 4.
Okay, thank you very much for the group. That's a thorough discussion, especially about the adenoma part. But you will encounter these type of tumors in a separate topic later on this school year. So about intracranial neoplasms, both benign and malignant. So for our topic, it's very important to correlate, as mentioned in the lectures, no, presentation. Complaints about vision, extraocular movements, pupils, pupillary functions, those signs and symptoms can be seen in varied neurological conditions. No, so very important is to determine whether the patient's complaint pertains to, and together with the findings, pertains to a local problem versus a central problem, because in some cases they can coexist. For example, a cataract affecting your pupillary examination, and at the same time the patient has visual field defects caused by a lesion in the visual tract. So yung correlation behind that, because that's what anatomy, no, knowledge about clinical neuroanatomy and how you correlate it with the signs and symptoms together with the history, wherein you can decipher which one will you consider in terms of localization. So we are guided by the principle of is there a lesion? Is there a neurological lesion? So that's the first question of the three, no? First is there a lesion? Second is, where is the lesion? That's localization. And then finally, what is the lesion? So the differential diagnosis is guided by the localization, no? A close differential diagnosis, as discussed, is what happens in the optic chiasm. Primary impression, correct, because yung upward movement. So there's a very straightforward yung history. It's only bitemporal hemianopsia, no? Pero in some cases, it can involve other cranial nerves, no? Particularly in the area of cavernous sinus. So in that area kasi, so coming from below, you will have an idea that it's coming from below if, for example, there's an early affectation of the unilateral oculomotor nerve, trochlear nerve, or even affecting the sensory of the ipsilateral face, no? Kasi V1 and V2. Those are located in the periphery. Dito kasi sa patient, solely ano lang, bitemporal hemianopsia, no? So we're just only talking about below the optic chiasm. What about above the optic chiasm? What are the structures, no? You have the floor of the fourth ventricle, the suprasellar structures, hypothalamus. You can have craniopharyngioma there. You can also have hydrocephalus in the third ventricle, which can cause bitemporal hemianopsia. So, yun. You will have an idea of how the lesion is progressing and what is the location of the lesion based on the events, the sequence of the appearance of neurological signs and symptoms, and your examination as well. Do you have any questions, comments? Okay, if none, good luck on your exam. So we will focus on the no for my topic. We will focus on the correlation, correlation, and then interpretation of signs and symptoms. Okay. Thank you. I think your examination is on Friday next week. Tama ba? Okay. Have a good day.
Thank you po.
Thank you po, Doc.
Thank you po.